Thank you for being here with us as we share preliminary research and findings of this Archie Green funded project. Thank you to the Library of Congress and the American Folklife Center for making this possible.
2021 marks the 100th anniversary of the first demonstration of the crop dusting process. By 1924, crop dusting, or aerial application, had become a commercialized service with the establishment of a company called Huff Dallin Dusters. It coincidentally later morphed into Delta Airlines. During these years after World War I, anyone, flying experience or not, could purchase a surplus biplane for pennies on the dollar. There were no regulations or formal training required. It was a period of industrial expansion, exploration, and innovation, especially in aviation. We can't be absolutely sure, but because of the type of plane that it is, this crop duster could have been an employee of Huff Dallin Dusters. The date on the photo is 1924. The photograph, taken in Cheyenne, Wyoming, shows a pilot and my 17-year-old grandmother standing next to the plane. This was the era of barnstormers and what were called flying shows. This is no doubt where the stereotype of the reckless crop duster was born. They flew the same planes, and it wasn't uncommon for pilots to do both, whatever made a dollar. Tracing the absolute evolution of the aerial application aircraft is complex and for another day. Suffice it to say that the need for a plane specifically designed for spraying crops safely and efficiently was in demand. It was a man named Leland Snow who had the education and vision to accomplish that dream. In 1952, he designed the S-1A. The industry responded to his innovation, and soon Cessna, Piper, and Grumman entered the market. These still fly, but it is Leland Snow's yellow and blue air tractor that is the gold standard today. We live on a farm in southwest Missouri. It is cropland and pasture, and we run varied livestock as well as renting the cropland to a local farmer who grows corn, wheat, and beans. Living on a farm provided direct access to the people we interviewed. It was most beneficial that we are friends with Dusty Elkington, who is the first pilot we interviewed. While independent in nature, this group of people are tight-knit and inherently suspicious of outsiders. Dusty offered us both contacts and credibility when contacting other pilots. Andrew Moore of NAAA, National Agricultural Aviation Association, told us that while it's difficult to state exactly, there are between 3,000 and 4,000 licensed ag pilots in the US, but not all are currently flying. Needless to say, this is not a large number. Most pilots are self-employed, small family-run businesses registered as LLCs. Usually it is the wife who takes care of the paperwork and money, but it is the pilot who takes the phone calls and schedules the application. There are also ag co-ops and vertically integrated ag businesses that include aerial spraying. Our focus, however, is the independent operator. During the duration of this project, we visited with these pilots at the hangars at small Midwestern municipal airports. These airports are not just home base for ag pilots, but also fueling stops for the general aviation public. We never knew who might show up, corporate and private jets, and the occasional vintage aircraft headed to an air show. Though we were eminently curious and decidedly determined, we would not have succeeded without our secret weapon, AKA Jack Kendrick, ace code switcher. Steeped in redneck ease, he was able to talk our way into a bastion of masculine hegemony in order to arrange these interviews. Even still, it took multiple phone calls to get the pilots to commit to an interview. Once in, it took a great deal of faux ignorance and mommy talk on my part to get them to open up. During these interviews, we had to play to each of our strengths to accomplish the task. Though each pilot has an individual story, it quickly became obvious that there are commonalities. They have what we call a pilot personality. They operate in the now, not dwelling on what has happened or what could be. To do so would endanger their lives. Dusty says that if he is upset about something, he will sit at the run-up area on the runway and just let it go. We found this to be true of all of the pilots. All of the pilots have a rural background. They grew up on farms, in small towns, or in an area where the economy was based on agriculture. Some expressed a lifelong fascination with flight in general, as well as with the ag pilots they had seen as children. Another commonality is a family history of aviation. Austin Daniel is a fifth-generation pilot and third-generation ag pilot. His grandfather started spraying when he couldn't find anyone to spray his own cranberry fields in New Jersey. Austin and his wife Emily are currently in the process of taking over ownership of this original family aerial spraying business. Emily Daniel is a third-generation pilot and started flying when she was 13. Both of her parents are also pilots. Brad Slaughter is interesting because his father, who flew both private and commercial, started taking his children up and insisting they take a turn at flying. Brad was the only one who stuck with it. He went on to perform aerobatics at air shows with his father. He eventually got his commercial license, Part 137, and became a crop duster. Floyd McElwain, the oldest pilot we interviewed at 85, started flying as a young man before the industry was regulated. He got his start spraying tobacco crops and soybeans in northwest Missouri. Floyd bought the 7th Aeronautical S-2B that he got from his mentor. Floyd tells a story of finding himself in an elevator with Leland Snow while attending an NAAA conference one year in Las Vegas. In the course of chatting, Leland asked Floyd what the serial number of his plane was, and when Floyd reeled it off, Leland said, "That's the 7th production plane I built." Though he doesn't fly as much now, Floyd has been influential in the Midwest because of his willingness to mentor new pilots through the process of becoming ag pilots.
The inherent danger in this profession is a constant consideration. On the ground, there are moving propellers, machinery, other planes, and chemicals. In the air, high-tension wires, wind turbines, meteorological towers, and even ducks. 2 pilots in particular brought the safety concerns home. Floyd represents an old-school way of thinking, which can be summed up by fly the plane to the ground. This means complete the process. There should be no compromise. You're not done flying until you're on the ground and the engine is shut down. He tells a tragic story known to every pilot we talk to about a young woman he mentored. She came to him to learn to be an ag pilot. He spent many hours teaching her. In a weak moment, she got careless and made a bad decision to go up in a P-51D with a pilot who didn't know, who decided to show off to a pretty girl. Her decision went against everything Floyd had taught her. He grieves and is angry to this day for her unnecessary death. In contrast, Emily approaches this in a much more structured way. She is a trained meteorologist and approaches every flight from the point of what can go wrong. Her goal is to avoid every disaster. She wears a helmet and a Nomex flight suit. She regularly attends safety conferences and seminars and advocates for other pilots to attend and join the NAAA. As different as these 2 pilots might seem, ultimately their goal is the same: to come home safely and encourage every other pilot to do the same. A moment's loss of attention can result in a life-threatening incident. Case in point is Aaron's 402 incident. On the last run of the day, his attention wavered and he clipped a high-tension wire and augured into a field. He landed upside down and then flipped over when he slid into a tree. The cockpit was intact. Aaron walked away.
During a substantial part of the year, the hangars are home to the pilots. They definitely reflect the personality of the pilots who inhabit them. Kevin is meticulous. Brad's hangar is his trophy room for dead animals and Jim Beam bottles. Sam is a little messy, and Jacob is a hoarder with 2 hangars full of airplanes and parts, both big and small. Aaron uses his to build a kit plane off season, and they all have models and pictures of a variety of airplanes on the wall. This is Dusty Elkington. His operation was central to most of the visual content of this project. He is our neighbor and friend. He is also the pilot who does flybys over our house too early on summer mornings. A farm kid from Oskaloosa, Kansas, he started as a successful rodeo cowboy and then a TV celebrity on Toughest Cowboy, then the owner of a fencing company, and finally an ag pilot. Samuel likes to say that without him, this project would not have gotten off the ground. He made me say that. The question that we ask every participant in the project is, how did you get started in this industry? Everyone who wants to be an ag pilot has to, under supervision, acquire a private license, then accrue flight hours for a commercial license, and then to fly anything other than a Cessna Ag Wagon or a Piper Pawnee, they have to get a high performance endorsement. Therein lies the gray area. To fly, you need insurance, but to get insurance, you have to get actual spraying flight time. Until you have about 600 hours, you are uninsurable. So you either find someone like Floyd McElwain who will put you on their insurance and teach you, or you can pay a lot of money to attend an ag aviation school. Even after that, insurance is outrageously expensive. 40 to 45K per year, we've been told. And then you still need a plane and clients. The final option is to buy a plane, fly, and hope the FAA doesn't show up until you pass the high performance test. It happens. It is no wonder that this is such a tight-knit community. Even though they spend most of the days alone in the cockpit, they know each other and depend on each other to help out when they need help in jobs. It's funny because they are all somewhat gossipy. Multiple times we hear, "Oh, you talked to him? What did he have to say? Say anything about me?" Halfway through this project, we knew we needed to go to the air tractor factory. To understand the pilots, we had to understand the airplanes. So we went to Alney, Texas to visit the factory. Our visit to Air Tractor was immersive. They were generous with their time and information, and we talked to a lot of people. After the unexpected death of Leland Snow in 2011, Jim Hirsch took over as CEO and president. Jim has worked at Air Tractor for 19 years, so he, along with head engineer Dave Lund, have successfully maintained the vision of Leland Snow. Passionate about the planes, their goal is to provide the safest and most reliable machine by not making any radical changes. It is basically the same plane that it was in 1978. They have, however, adapted it for some essential roles designed before Leland Snow's death. This is the Fire Boss. It is an aerial firefighting single-engine air tanker. It carries 800 gallons of water, and 3 of these planes can drop more water in an hour than a single 747 supertanker. A 402B air tractor new costs about $850,000, a 502B about $1 million, a 602B $1.5 million, an 802B costs just under $2 million. This is a significant investment and reflects the serious nature and intent of these pilots who purchased them. What we found particularly fascinating is how fundamentally simple they are. Basically, they are made of chromoly steel, wires, zip ties, and pop cans. The secret lies in the design. In April of this year, the 4,000th plane rolled out. They turn out an average of 100 planes a year, and they're built to protect the pilots and do one job only, spray crops. The planes are Leland Snow, and he is gone. The planes are flown by pilots who may not know who Leland Snow is or what he created. The pilots don't know him and never will, even though they can fly the planes and do the job that he created it to do. He made a complex machine designed solely by him. It was not designed by a team of engineers, but by a single man who conceived and made every single part that makes it work. He is an anomaly in aviation. The actual day in the life of an ag pilot is a complex system. From the initial contact with the farmer to the final application involves a multitude of decisions and steps. Some involve reading the farmer's mind as he describes where he wants you to spray. Some involve scientific calculations, and some involve public relations, so you don't get shot at or turned into the FAA because someone on the ground thinks your plane makes too much noise. At dawn, the day starts by attaching either the spreader or the spray boom, depending on what is being applied. Boom for liquid and the spreader for dry. Chemical has to be calculated and mixed accordingly so that the actual chemical applied is in a range between 1 and 5 ounces per acre. This is done by the pilot's loader, but it's not unusual for the pilots to do this themselves. Paper maps are checked. These are satellite imaging overlaid with USDA field maps. These files are transferred from the computer to the aircraft's SatLock system, but the pilot will keep the paper maps in the cockpit in case of a systems failure. Fuel is checked, weather is checked, and it's time to fly. While all this loading and checking is going on, the plane sits patiently on the apron, still turning. This means the park brake is set, fuel is idle, and the prop is in neutral, but still rotating. Throughout the day, the aircraft is never shut down. The cockpit is tight and access is limited. As Dusty says, there's a way a real ag pilot gets in, and then there's the way I get in. He tends to throw himself in the cockpit and then sorts his arms and legs out after. In fact, every pilot has his or her own way of getting in and out. There is no right way. As the pilot taxis out, engine vitals have to be checked, radio frequencies are set, departure is announced, and the iTunes playlist is punched in. For Dusty, that's the most important part of his checklist, the right music to fly by. Takeoff is usually accompanied by a little classic rock. On top of all these things going on, we had to take time out to integrate camera setup into the checklist, which meant more exposure as we worked around the live aircraft. As if that isn't dangerous enough, the obstacles in the air are ever present. There are hedgerows on the edges of fields to contend with, livestock to be avoided, and the plane is flying 10 to 20 feet above ground level. If it's corn, then they are 12 to 17 feet above. If it's beans, they are 6 to 10 feet above. The flying itself is extremely demanding physically. These planes are mechanical, called stick and rudder, which means through the hands and feet, the pilot controls every move the airplane makes. A pilot season in the Midwest starts in March and ends mid-October. During this time, Dusty logged 800 takeoffs and landings, 80 steep turns per hour, and a total of 643.7 hours during this current season. Most of these hours are flown at a high angle of attack and close to the bottom of the white arc or stall speed. The last day of the season is a bittersweet relief. Off season isn't really off, though the grind of flying every day is. There is maintenance to be done, planes to be bought and sold, refresher courses to take, people to see, and families to reconnect with. And then you get ready to do it all over again in 5 months.
One of our favorite stories comes from our friend Kevin Kingsley. He dropped in on his first run of the day with a full load. As soon as he pulled into the swath, a duck popped up and slammed into the left side windshield, destroying it and covering the interior with duck guts and blood. He continued to fly the load on, returned to the airport, taxied up to the apron where he flung the exploded duck carcass out the side window, and said, "Load me up." With duck guts still smeared in the cockpit, he flew the entire day and 2 more after because he had made a commitment to the farmer. At the end of the 3rd day, with the application complete, he stepped down out of the cockpit and his only comment was, "Well, it was a little windy." In our interviewing experience, it has become inarguably clear that the common public perception of the ag pilot being a reckless barnstormer is diametrically opposed to the reality of who they are and what they do.